This is Canon Fodder, episode 35. We are back in ancient Greece, so of course I brought my friend, the Athenian Stranger. How are you, sir?
Doing good, doing good. Thanks so much for having me back, my friend.
So we went pretty hard on Ajax the last time that you were here, and we didn't even get through halfway through the play. So I wanted to have you back so we could, uh, you know, put a pin in Ajax and then maybe start another Greek play if there was time. But from our pre-conversation, it seems like we're going to have to maybe do Agamemnon another time, which fine by me because it's a joy to hear you wax philosophical and wax prosaic, I guess, on these topics.
Yeah, the big danger always, I think, is I always have to be careful because you don't the temptation is to read philosophy out of poetry or something like that. And that's always dangerous because you want to make sure that you give the poet his fair share, right? I mean, the poet's not a philosopher, and so I always have to try to catch myself. So I like going into these conversations. Anytime it has to do with literature or poetry, I just like to remind everyone that I'm aware of the fact that these are not strictly speaking philosophers. I'm just bringing the kind of philosophical angle to help understand these things, perhaps deeper, perhaps.
I was thinking about that actually in the car the other day. I was like, what is the synthesis between philosophy and literature? Because and feel free to correct me as I'm like pretty lay when it comes to philosophy, but it's the study of the good life, right? Like how to lead a good life, and literature is sort of the lab in which maybe philosophy is tested. And I'm wondering, like, where is the line between what is literary and what is philosophical?
Well, this is sort of where I think like Aristotle's Poetics is very helpful because what he says there about uh, watching plays together, which is relevant for us, right? Because he certainly has in mind the tragedians. Um, he says that the pleasure that's derived from just thinking things through is not reserved solely for students of philosophy or something. He says it occurs when people join together to watch plays. And he says that it happens in the recognition that, and the Greek he uses is kind of funny. He says that a this is a that. In other words, you see something in a particular character and you have a kind of discovery. You're like, I know someone like that, right? That reminds me of so and so, right? And so, what one could say, I think, and this is very, very general, what one could say is that literature or poetry, they speak to very particular things, right? Because these are specific characters and such. But they always seem to aim at something beyond themselves, a kind of universal. And where philosophy comes in is philosophy is just trying to provide a logos or an account of whatever that universal might be. So poetry and literature are primary because they give us, in many ways, the experience. Whereas what philosophy does is it tries to move from that experience to a kind of a broader, I guess we could say, universal or something like that. Uh, but again, that's just very tentative um, because it's really hard to separate these two things, right? Because you can never talk about a universal in philosophy, right? Unless you understand the particular, right? So that would take you back to the literature or the poetry or the lived experience or something like that. So I think that they're, in many respects, they're two sides of the same coin, uh, but they're still unique enough in themselves to not be identical or something like that.
I was in a writer's workshop, and the guy who was leading it, he had us read James Joyce. And have you ever read Dubliners?
I have not.
It's a collection of short stories that all take place in the city of Dublin, and it was this. It's considered one of the finest collections of short stories ever. And the lesson that we were to take from the story that we read was that the specific describes the general. So the more specific that you can get about a place and a time and a people, the more anyone can kind of take out of that. So if we see, modern entertainment these days are trying to make things so broad and so general as to appeal to the broadest, most like common viewer, right, or consumer, and people are kind of off put that by that because there's nothing for them to anchor themselves to, right? There's no humanity there because they're just this blank slate, this sort of horse by committee.
Yeah, I like that. In other words, it's kind of like like in my mind, I'm thinking of a kind of uh, a honing in, like you think of like this kind of light, right? That you focus on something like maybe like a magnifying glass or something, but then on the other end of it, it comes out broader or something like that, and that might be a way of sort of seeing these things. I'd have to think about that to make it sound a little better, but yeah, a lot of times people refer to like movies or TV or whatever as escapism. Uh, but when you think about it, that's sort of the, the truth to that is that uh, we seek to escape into something very particular, right? So you want it to be very specific so people can relate to it better. And if it's just this incredibly broad, I don't know, kind of a Lollapalooza or something, it's like, well, I don't really, that doesn't really draw me in or anything. I want specifics, right? Give me details so I can anchor myself better into this.
And this doesn't have anything to really do with Ajax. I guess one of the benefits of having a podcast is going into tangents on things that I find interesting. Uh, to recap with or to get the audience sort of resituated, at this point Ajax has killed himself. He is cursing the sons of Atreus, so Menelaus and Agamemnon, the two sort of kings running the Achaean cohort. After the goddess Athena has made him see what is not there, after he has taken revenge upon the Achaeans, so he thinks, and he's come to realize that he has not actually killed anybody. He's only killed livestock. And that's a very brief overview of things. And anything that you want to add there?
Yeah. So so the way that I was going at trying to better understand all this, at least that first half of it was to see that for Ajax, there's because he's been sort of walking around talking to himself, right? At least that's what his uh, I don't know. I mean, is she his wife or his concubine or something? Tecmessa
Hmm.
has seen of him, right? That he's speaking to this well, a phantom, like he doesn't know, but it ends up being Athena, right? Um, and he thinks that he's doing the good thing, right? I mean, this is a kind of way of thinking of his the sanity that he sees, that he doesn't see himself as insane, but everyone watching on does, and he thinks it's completely justified. So this is a kind of his understanding of morality is like he's been betrayed, and so he's going to exact his rightful revenge, right? That's anytime you're talking about what is right, you're in the realm of morality. um, so the problem though is how do we reconcile this with a kind of self-discovery, right? Is the discovery of himself, uh, as us looking on to others, right? The kind of the madness that we might see of others, but in their mind, right? In their mind, It somehow seems to make sense to them, and it's that element that begins to really open things up. I think in this play, uh, with regard to how it begins, right? Because Odysseus is at the tent, right, and he wants to look inside, but he doesn't. And Athena says, don't worry about it. I'll bring him out and show you. You just can't move, right? So she makes Odysseus invisible. So she sort of reveals to Odysseus the deed that's going on that others are going to think it makes him insane, because Odysseus himself was invisible. So we're taking part in what everyone else is going to take part in with regard to Ajax, but not be able to understand it, right? But we know that he's talking to Athena. But for instance, Tecmessa, she doesn't know that he's talking to Athena or anything, and so uh, there's this way in which we can't look at the inner mind of people except without the assistance of something like the divine. But it's precisely that aspect of the divine that has got Ajax in trouble, because he doesn't want to. I mean, and we can point this out. We're told this later in the play, that he doesn't want to give credit to the gods. He wants to he, he wants to live in a world that is fully moral, where people get their just deserves. We could say he's optimistic uh, that the great man will always be revealed as the great man and treated as such. He doesn't have room in his understanding of the world. We could say again, his kind of morality. He doesn't have room there for something like either chance or, um, like I said, the divine. And we can get into, there are little instances we're going to find of this throughout the rest of the play, uh, among other things, right? Because this is something I was talking with you about before we started recording, is that ever since you asked me about doing a show on this, I hadn't thought much about it, because I don't really I haven't ever really done anything, at least in my own spaces, about Greek tragedy or anything like that, because there's not much of a demand for it. But it's just so rich, and it's unfortunate that more people don't read Greek tragedy. And so as I began to look deeper into this particular play, uh, just so much began to to unfold from it, where I was just like, oh my God, okay, we've got to have a couple discussions about this, because there's just so much here. Um, but yes, so that's where sort of things stand, is that we have this great man, Ajax, who can't handle a world in which uh, his understanding of what is right is not afforded the credit that it's right. And that's going to set him at odds with the very people that he's there to fight. Well, that he's there to fight with, right? His comrades in arms. And so understanding why it is that he, at least from their perspective, goes mad, whereas in his mind he's perfectly sane, and it makes complete sense. Understanding this unfolds into these things of, well, like I was just saying, this understanding of the role of chance, the role of the divine, and also, as we discussed a little bit towards the end of our last talk about this, is that has an awful lot to do with this understanding of honor that's accorded uh, to one's own people, and kind of friendship. And again, that'll tumble out of what we have to say, at least here in this second part of the play.
I'm glad that you brought up the concept of honor, because really, when we look at the play, the first half, right, up until Ajax's death, is, well, really you could break it up into three parts. So the first third, let's say, is Ajax coming to terms with a changing world and a changing morality that he can't deal with, right? Second third, right before his suicide, is like, how does one act honorably in a world he no longer understands? And then this third part, we could say, is what do do we give to our enemies once they have been defeated? And I think, and the argument around what to do with Ajax's body is all about what to do when the fighting stops, especially in the 20th century and especially in the United States of America. Though obviously there have been wars with a sort of more moralistic tinge to them before World War I, World War II, Civil War. Uh, everything is a rehash of World War II. We have to stop X to stop the next Hitler, sort of thing, right? But most wars didn't have that moral tinge to them, at least not in the same way, right? It was usually just sort of an exchange of land, but nobody was going after the king's crown, right? Nobody was going to punish their enemies so severely as to make sure they don't exist again. And here we see the two kings, right, Agamemnon and Menelaus. They're not satisfied with Ajax's death. They want to dishonor him further after death to make sure to send a message that uh, you do not betray the hand that feeds you, kind of thing, right? Am I getting the right read on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with all of that, and say that we could go quite a bit further. The that's it comes around to something, and this is what I was thinking of leading up to this discussion for the second half of the play, is that we hear um, there's always a lot of talk, for instance, at least in our orbit on Twitter, um, about Schmidt, and for good
Mm-hmm.
reason. And a lot of it always comes back around to this friend enemy distinction. And what I would suggest is that we have a much better and more rewarding examination of this thing known as the friend enemy distinction here in Sophocles' Ajax than we get for Schmidt. So we realize that it's not anything at all new under the sun. One doesn't have to go to Hobbes or anything like that. In fact, we get a much better teaching of it here. Um, so the question is, what happens when it turns out that, despite the fact that your enemy might want to destroy you completely or something like that, what happens when it turns out that they are still, that they do have redeeming qualities? Or should one even allow for the possibility of one saying that an enemy has redeeming qualities, right? And this kind of speaks to the passions of the soul. When we are at our most angry, right, our most passionate hatred, we don't want to even afford our enemy humanity at all. I mean, I can certainly understand this. I mean, as think of it this way. Well, let me build up to it instead, because I want to make sure I stay in the play. What what we get in the play, right around that point where you were talking about, where we basically ended the first discussion, and we didn't touch on this. Turns out that Ajax is going to associate all of it uh, with the sword that he gets from Hector. And let me just sort of find it right here. This is almost exactly like halfway through the play or so. He says, I'll dig in the ground. I'll dig in the ground and hide this sword of mine, the most hateful of weapons, out of sight. He says, make darkness and Hades, god of death, hold it in their safekeeping. And he says, for never, since I took it as a gift, which Hector, my great enemy, gave to me, have I known any kindness from the Greeks. So that takes us back to, okay, so So what's this big deal about the sword and Hector? Well, uh, this takes us back into the Iliad. And what happens in the Iliad is that this is when there's been a great change in the very reason of being of the war. It had been over Helen, but once the first one-on-one fight between Menelaus and Paris ends in indecision because Paris gets saved, right? He gets swooped out from the fighting. Then everything turns into just the gaining of glory, period. Uh, Not so much anything having to do with, there's no limits to it. Doesn't have anything to do with a woman or anything. And so they take as the greatest warrior of the Achaeans, because Achilles is sitting out, they take Ajax. So Ajax is understood to be the greatest, except for Achilles. And then Hector, everyone knows Hector's the greatest. And so they have this fight to the death. But it comes to a standstill, not because of anyone stepping in, really, but because they're both just so amazing. And both sides are just awestruck at how just incredible they are at fighting. And that each themselves also recognize the greatness of the other. And so they exchange gifts. And what happens, what's being said here from Ajax, is that when he accepted the gift of his enemy, uh, in other words, when he realized that his enemy was noble, that's when his fellow men, the Achaeans, began to look suspicious at him. They no longer, that's at least that's what Ajax is claiming. And what what I was thinking of right before we even started this was there's been a lot of doxing. There's always doxing that goes on in our orbit, and I had I tweeted something to the effect of have nothing to do with these people. Just flat out don't have anything to do with people who traffic in doxing. And I was getting caught up on my notifications, and one of my mutuals had said something to the effect of, "No, I think this is a great gift." He said something like, "I'll happily accept it uh, because it exposes people as enemies," or something like that. And I just was thinking to myself that's so wrong. The thinking there is just absolutely so wrong. And in fact, what Ajax says in this exact passage, almost immediately, when he's realized that by taking as something good from an enemy, this is what he says. He says, let me find it. Uh, Here it is. He says, "I think the ancient proverb speaks the truth." Well, what's the ancient proverb? Well, he's about to tell us. The ancient proverb simply says, "An enemy's gift is ruinous and no gift." Right. So to accept any gift from an enemy is one's downfall.
And I mean, we see that played out in Troy itself with the Trojan horse. You know, not in the
Absolutely.
Iliad, but you know afterwards.
And you
And
know that Sophocles has that in mind, right? Because
mm,
everyone knows it's the Trojan horse, right? I mean, and Odysseus is involved in that too, right? He's sort of involved in that.
but one has to wonder also the treachery of friends too, or supposed friends. You know, Ajax has to also be thinking, you know, with friends like these, who needs enemies? You know, the honor that he has built up, the cachet of greatness that he has, as soon as it's inconvenient, is no longer. It's like he has no social standing, and he loses the armor in the first place. You know, as soon as he's
Exactly.
no longer useful, he's nothing.
No, you're exactly right. And this is what he says, his own thoughts about this. And unfortunately, he stops short. He doesn't keep going. And one could say that that's also part of the tragedy here, that he doesn't keep going with this. Uh, he says, he says, "Shall not I learn place and wisdom?" Talking about his own place and in the grand scheme of things with people, and wisdom. He says, "Have I not learned this? Uh, Only so much to hate my enemy as though he might again become my friend." and so much good to wish to do my friend, as knowing he may yet become my foe. And he's asking that as a question. And he says, most men have found friendship a treacherous harbor. And then he cuts off and he says enough. This will be well. And it's like, well, no, that's not enough, because uh, he's broached the most important topic of all of it, right? I mean, one could even say the code of honor among men. I mean, he's finally found it. He's got his finger on the pulse of it, and he leaves it at a question, right? Where he says, to what extent am I supposed to truly hate an enemy, versus to what extent am I supposed to truly do good for friends, when in either case they could become the other, right? We just don't know. Um,
Sophocles has his own version of the prisoner's dilemma right there.
yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
it, you know, it really, I'm so glad that you were able to come back to do this, and I do want to go through as many Greek tragedies as possible with you, just because uh, there is, as you said, there is nothing new under the sun, and there's a lot to be gleaned from reading these. And I think that question that Ajax poses is answered after his death. That you can't trust any friend as much as you need to rely on a blood relative, right? Because the only person that really sticks up for Ajax in death is his brother Tuker. Am I saying that right? Tucer. Uh,
Yeah, in many cases we don't know. I mean, it depends on the Greek accents, and so I never get pedantic about that. You'll get people who say, no, 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 it's Tukor, and then you'll have others who say, no, no. I mean, you can say Tusor. I just say Tukor. It doesn't matter.
Tucor it is then, but we see that you know I mean, they literally want Ajax to be left for the buzzards, to be so dishonored, and it's only through the ties of blood and then some politicking by Odysseus that he's given a proper funeral. It's two extremes: the extreme loyalty and love of a relative, and the extreme treachery, let's say, of a politician, right? Of someone. It's more convenient for Odysseus, at least how I read it, it's more convenient for Odysseus to not so thoroughly punish an enemy because he could one day become an enemy.
Yeah, I'm I, I'm sort of undecided on how I feel about this, because, and we can read it in its entirety, the speech that Odysseus gives to Agamemnon about this role. Um, but Odysseus, his hands aren't completely clean in all this, because this is the amazing thing. The play started with uh, Athena revealing what was really going on to Odysseus. Because remember, if Odysseus had simply looked in the tent, all he would have seen was the same thing that Tecmessa saw, right? Just Ajax talking to some invisible thing, right? He's gone mad. But Athena says, no, 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 I'll show you what's really going on. And so Odysseus knows exactly why Ajax is doing everything he's doing, and he believes he's acting in concert with the divine. But when Odysseus goes to tell other people about it, he leaves everything of Athena out of it. He doesn't let people know that Athena was involved in it. Um, Hopefully, let's see, the jets are flying overhead. Hopefully, you can't hear them.
I can't hear anything. I think you're
Okay,
good.
okay, good. But yeah, but then he does stick up for uh, Ajax in the very end, like that, to Agamemnon. And you just have to ask yourself, well, I mean, if Odysseus had just been a little more honest about what he knew, that could have made all the difference. But possibly, and I mean, I'm just kind of thinking out loud here, possibly Odysseus doesn't say that because he already knows exactly what you were pointing out, that Ajax is kind of got his finger on the pulse of, which is you just don't know how much you're ever really supposed to reveal of what you know to people who aren't, for instance, blood, as opposed to just friends. I mean, and again, we can say that that's what could possibly be part of the ingredient that makes this so tragic. Um, and again, I always like to tell people, you want to have a kind of uh, sort of working template just to start with of what you think tragedy is. And what I like to tell people is that at its most basic level, tragedy is uh, the good man who tries to do the good thing, but he fails for whatever reason, right? He fails. And what we might be seeing here with Ajax and what becomes the discussion of what to do with his body for Agamemnon is precisely this kind of inherent failure that would take place if one is to fully reveal what one knows versus what one doesn't know uh, to people who are friends as opposed to family. I mean, I have to think about that a little bit more, but I mean, just think of it this way: the way the very last few lines of the play say it all, and this is where I get so frustrated with some of these translations. But this is what was irritating me beyond belief with regard to going back over the Agamemnon. Some of the translations are just, and they're considered to be some of the best translations. They're just so off. But it doesn't come out. So the translation that I have is part of that famous University of Chicago 4-volume collection that's considered to be like this great thing. And the guy who translated is supposed to be this great scholar, but it just doesn't come out in the Greek. A better way to say these last lines would be something like the following: many things are to be known to mortals by being seen, but before seeing, no one is a prophet of the things to come, of what he will do, right? So, so I mean, and I'm still not quite entirely sure how to really interpret that, but that goes to this problem that Odysseus has had to be shown, right, by Athena what's going on, uh, but knowing anything beyond having seen it uh, is just sort of beyond the pale for mankind as wisdom, right? Because remember, Agamemnon hasn't seen any of this. They've all just heard, and all of the Greeks, they've just heard by rumor. And in fact, we're specifically told in the play that Odysseus is the one who's spreading some of the rumor. Uh, but yeah, anyway, again, just so much, right? So very much comes tumbling out of this to just try to understand ourselves, um, of the very nature of our human condition, because what is more natural to man than having family that one loves and also having friends that, not necessarily many, but friends that one would otherwise think are family, right? And say, I would die for that guy, right? And this is especially true when you're in a kind of a combat setting, right? A military setting. Brothers in arms, we say they're brothers in arms because when your life literally depends upon another guy that standing shoulder to shoulder with you, and that's family, right? Um, but anyway, that was sort of a long ramble there. I mean, I guess I'll hand it back over to you now because I just
No, no, and I co-sign on all of that, and I think the play bears that out as well, right? Before Ajax goes off to end his own life, he gives his shield to his young son, right? And there, in the collection that I have of Sophocles plays, it's Electra, and it's Philoctetes, right? And I didn't put this together until sort of recently. Is in Philoctetes, and I don't mean to jump from one play to another, but let me give me a little rope for a second. In Philoctetes, one of the principal characters is Achilles' son, Neoptolemus. So he had a blood relation that if the arms of Achilles had gone to his son, we would never have had the Ajax. The situation would have never come up. But because we have these two treacherous kings, right? Suddenly the bonds of friendship and in many ways the bonds of familial relation are broken by that treachery.
That's such a good thought. I hadn't even thought of that, but you're right. I mean, I had not even thought of that.
The natural order of things is broken by these two men, and it costs Ajax his life, and it costs Odysseus his integrity.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of how to relate this in a very similar way, like what you're doing there with the plays, uh, from the philosophical perspective. We have these sayings of Aristotle, right? That most people are familiar with. Man is by nature rational, and man is by nature political. And I'm trying to bring this together as a way, because the complexities here seem to just be inherent, right? That we can't avoid them because man is political. And so you're always going to have this kind of this nexus, right, of the tentacles of life, right, sort of sprawling out and dragging other things into the family, but also the family dragging things from the polis into itself. Uh, just trying to think of how situations like these could ever not arise, right? I mean, it just seems like it's something. Like I said, I guess it's just a sort of another way of me stating what I said a moment ago about uh, just being the situation of man's condition, the nature of man here.
Mm.
But to your point, though, I mean, it's like if we're going to be dragged into these things, why not always err on the side of doing right by the family? Um, but then again, anyone who's ever been married or anything knows, right? You get the in-laws. It's like
Yeah, right.
sometimes you like them, sometimes you don't. And it's like, oh man, they've got a claim to, my tradition, my heritage, or
and
something.
and I mean the problems there are a ton of problems inherent with family. So in the Agamemnon, we have this idea of family come up again because one, Agamemnon dishonors himself and his family, and then is later murdered for it, and that whole the whole Orestia cycle is one revenge after another because of the actions of Agamemnon. So yeah, these family binds are tricky, and you have to, it's so natural and so embedded in what it means to be a person that to mess with that even a little bit just spells doom for you.
Yeah, now you got me thinking about the Agamemnon now, and one of the things that sort of stopped me dead in my tracks is, I mean, it's sort of at the beginning of the play. Uh, we don't know what happens. There's like, so there's uh, somehow Agamemnon has to sacrifice his daughter, uh, and what we're not told why. We don't know what crime Agamemnon has committed in order to have to do this. And so that was one of the, so just bringing that up, I'm like, oh man, we're already in the thicket. It's like,
Yeah, no,
how do we
and
do it?
maybe we should dedicate a whole other block to the whole of the Orestia, because as we were kind of discussing before, Aeschylus, he's dense. It's a it is a dense play. Whereas I mean Sophocles, it's very straightforward. Well, more so straightforward, I guess, and still dense, but I guess from a yeah, I'd say it's more straightforward. I think
Well,
is.
just something for your readers to or your listeners to keep in mind. Uh, I always have to say this. It turns out that Nietzsche and the untimely meditations, what he argues is that well he okay so in The Birth of Tragedy, which is his first book,
Mm,
he says that what is needed is something like a music making Socrates. And so, everyone always wonders, well, is the music making Socrates, is that ultimately what Zarathustra becomes for Nietzsche? Because he does say that he's a poet at one point, and he always dances. But what he says in his second book, Untimely Meditations, is he argues throughout that what's needed going forward is a combination, on the one hand, of a Greek tragedian, and on the other hand, a kind of late modern philosopher. And the two people that he names for each of these that are somehow supposed to be combined, on the one hand, are Aeschylus, and on the other hand, Schopenhauer.
mm.
So that's how important it is, for Nietzsche at least to fully understand Aeschylus, and so that's why I want so desperately to be able to understand that play of how, because because you're exactly right. It's that whole cycle, right? But that whole cycle starts off with Agamemnon, right? So we've got to understand that play, because
I wonder if Wagner is that combination. I know he's heavily, and I haven't read a lot of Nietzsche, so forgive me, but I know Birth of Tragedy is heavily, it's dedicated to Wagner, and it's very heavily influenced by him. And I'm just thinking, Schopenhauer and Aeschylus. Yeah, no, I could see the opera composer as sort of a synthesis of those two things.
well, that's what he argues in that second book. I mean, that's what he's getting at, but he becomes disillusioned by Wagner for different reasons. But he does still publish that the last part, uh, Richard Wagner in Beirut. Um, and so that's something that can never be forgotten. People will always say things like, "Well, Nietzsche came to disown Wagner." Well, yes and no. He never disowns the claims of the combination of the Aeschylus and the Schopenhauer, and he does also disown Schopenhauer. But even again in that second book, uh, it's it's what he wanted these people to be, right? It's what he wanted Wagner to be. It's what he wanted Schopenhauer to
The
be.
ideal, yeah,
Exactly.
or
Yeah.
the
Exactly.
archetype. Right?
Exactly.
Because also Greek tragedy, as you were mentioning earlier on, is dealing with archetypes. The reason that we watch these things or we read them is because we see people we know or things that remind us of real life in them, right? So the ideal artist philosopher is a man who isn't brought down by whatever it is, whether it's his petty prejudices or his politics or something like that. He's beyond that, right? And Faulkner, for whatever you like or dislike about the man, his work makes him the man, sort of transcendent beyond. And the reason that I hate the stupid cancel culture bullshit, and I don't mean to get too deep into this, but I've been reading recently Douglas Southall Friedman's book on Robert E. Lee, and I'm like, damn, what a man! What a capital H hero, and
Yeah.
just to see what's happened to his legacy, it just really chafes me the wrong way. Sorry, I don't mean to
No, no,
delve
you're
too deep
exactly
on that.
no, you're exactly right. And look at what happened to his opponent, right? Ulysses S. Grant. All one has to do is read about what Grant did as president of the United States. I mean, it was like drinking binge parties in the White House. I mean, it's all it was.
Oh, I mean, if you
And
read, not Ron Grant, but whoever he had a recent bio, Ron Chernow. That's it. Did a treatment of Grant in the last few years, and yeah, it's just been Grant apologia, uh, and like a well, actually, he was a good president. He just was surrounded by bad people, and actually this and actually that.
That's a bunch
Uh,
of nonsense. That's just a bunch of
yeah, oh,
nonsense.
definitely. And it's interesting that they got the guy who rehabilitated Hamilton in a lot of ways, uh, to also give an even more extreme treatment of Grant. And the same guy, he kind of brought down Washington. Don't read Ron Chernow, folks. Anyway, uh, and I guess it kind of goes back to Ajax too, because here we have these two bitter kings trying to bring down the deeds of Ajax. See how I did that? Trying to bring him down to the status of, oh, he wasn't that cool anyway. He was actually always kind of a douche, forgetting that he's the man who fought Hector to a standstill, and he is the one who brought Patroclus's body back. Or well, he was part of the team that brought Patroclus's body back, and he he was one of the men who tried to convince Achilles to come back to the field. Like, he's a great man, and he deserves more than what he has sort of become.
Yeah, let me if you give me just a little leeway here,
Of course.
because it speaks so perfectly to everything you've just said. This is what this is this amazing moment towards the end of the play. Uh, it's the dialogue that happens between Agamemnon and Odysseus, and this is what Odysseus says. He says, Agamemnon, may a friend speak truth to you. Now, there we have, right, this issue of friend that I've been talking about, because it's the friend enemy distinction that's been at work really all along.
Mm.
And he says, Agamemnon, may a friend speak truth to you and still enjoy your friendship as before. Agamemnon says, speak. I would be foolish to resent your words. You are my truest friend in the whole army. Odysseus says, then listen. Don't cast out this brave man's body unburied. Don't, in the god's name, be so hard. Vindictiveness should not so govern you as to make you trample on the right. Probably the Greek word there is dk, justice. He says, I too found this man hateful once beyond the rest of all my fellow soldiers since the time I won Achilles' armor. He says, nevertheless, in spite of his enmity, I cannot wish to pay him with dishonor or refuse to recognize in him the bravest man of all that came to Troy except Achilles. He says it would be wrong to do him injury in acting so. He says you'd not be injuring him, rather you'd be injuring the god's law. He says it's a foul thing to hurt the valiant man in death, though he was your enemy. And Agamemnon says, do you, Odysseus, take his part or his side against me? Odysseus says, I do. He said, I hated him while it was fair to hate. And again, I'd be curious about the Greek that gets used there for the word fair. It's probably that same word again, dk, justice. And then Agamemnon says, but now he's dead. Shouldn't you rightly trample on his corpse? And Odysseus says, he says, forbear, my lord, to seek unworthy triumphs. And Agamemnon says, reverence doesn't come easily to a prince. So, in other words, Agamemnon's trying to make excuses for why he wants to break even the law of the divine law, right? And Odysseus says, regard for a friend's advice is not so difficult. And Agamemnon says, a good man should defer to his superiors. And
This
then
fucking guy.
and then Odysseus says, no more now. He says, you win the victory when you yield to friends. And Agamemnon says, think what a man you're interceding for. And Odysseus says, my enemy, it's true. He says, but he was noble. And Agamemnon says, do you intend pity to a corpse you hate? And Odysseus says, his greatness. Now, now I do know the Greek word there is arete, which is virtue. So he says, his virtue weighs more than my hate with me. And so this is the dilemma, right? This is exactly what you had mentioned previously, because when you're dealing with when you're dealing with true enemies, I mean, it, on the one hand, it shouldn't matter how great they are because uh, their greatness is going to be employed to your destruction, your complete destruction. Uh, and so Agamemnon recognizes that because, in the grand scheme of things, as a people, right, uh, you have to, at the end of the day, love what is yours, your people, more than that which would destroy your people, or else there's really no ties that bind. Um, on the other hand, though, what you see with Odysseus is he's looking beyond that of a people and he's seeing the merit of an individual person and saying, no, that was a great man. And so, I mean, I don't know that there's any. It's a hard thing to reconcile, right? Uh,
You know
yeah, go
who
ahead,
re-
please.
you know who really understood this concept is the Romans. You know, Hannibal in ancient Rome. Hannibal was considered, he was an enemy, yes, but he was so great an enemy, and his defeat only propped up the greatness of Rome, right? And Odysseus isn't doing that. He's not saying, well, look, we defeated this guy, so that just makes us all the better. But it's that same impulse to honor a defeated foe. Because, yeah, I mean, Ajax is a corpse at this point. He can't do anything more to you, right? And you have to look at the whole corpus, and I use that word intentionally, but you have to look at his entire life. uh, yes, he ended it poorly. Yes, he was an enemy at the end, but he was also at one time a friend. So there has to be balance, and there has to, fate has to be. We all end up in the same place, so we'd all like to be treated by our enemies. Yeah, treat those around you as you would like to be treated, right? You can kind of see uh, the the inklings of the philosophy that the Christians would later use to convert Greece to Christianity.
Right, right, yeah. Yeah, and what Odysseus says there, though, I mean, it again, it sort of leaves out what we need the most. He says, "I hated him when it was fair to hate him." Well, okay, when did that fairness change, right? Is it when he committed suicide or something? And because we need to know, right? Uh, we we look at sort of, to go back to Nietzsche here, and in that second book that I was talking about, where he does discuss, the greatness of Aeschylus. What he says is that if he could just have 100 men who read Plutarch, he could take over the world. And the point there is that what you find in Plutarch is greatness, right? They don't. Nietzsche's claim is that you don't see it anymore in the modern world. You don't see these things in the modern world anymore. And that's what we're contemplating here with this play, is the greatness of Ajax. Um, and so it's something that we're not really used to seeing, of course, because we're still in the same world that Nietzsche is talking about. Um, but what Nietzsche says after that, that often gets left out, is he says the reason that he wants these 100 people to read Plutarch, is he says they have to be able to believe that that kind of greatness is still possible.
Hmm.
So we need to still be able to believe that the kind of greatness of someone like an Ajax is still possible, right? So I guess we could say that's where Odysseus is siding on this issue. Um, but again, I mean, I'm sort of I'm in my own mind, I'm kind of, when I look at the bigger picture, I think about our enemies today. Uh, I mean, something as simple as people who dox versus, the rest of the world that would like to uh, see us, that would like to celebrate our destruction.
Hmm.
And in my mind, I'm kind of like Agamemnon. I want to see them dead, and I want to see the birds feasting on their guts as they decay in the sun.
Right, right.
Uh, and then on the other hand, you have to ask yourself, well, I mean, you know, and this is kind of the Machiavellian approach. You know, you have to understand if your enemies have good qualities or something like that. It's a difficult it's a difficult thing to draw. That and on the one hand, that's also why I have such great respect for like soldiers, right? Uh, they're simply they're the weapon. Just point us at what you need to get done, and it'll be done, right? That's it. We're not going to make the decisions or anything like that, right? We are the weapon. We implement what you tell us what the justice is. Makes life a lot easier. But then, for guys like us, when we're no longer in the battle, I guess, uh, it, we can't help but think about these things and struggle with them and wrestle with them and things.
And I mean, it's interesting too that this is a lesson that is never fully learned, because that's one of the lessons of Achilles' life. If he had at first honored Hector in death, right, there would have, and we can't know what the fates would have held for him, but he would have held on to more esteem. It is clearly wrong what he does to Hector's body. And at the close of the Iliad, as he and Priam sort of embrace and have a moment of friendship, right, over their shared grief, the loss of a son, the loss of a brother, uh, we realize that, yes, we can embrace our enemies, even if only for a moment, right? They're still human, and they're within them is the spark of the divine, right? You're probably the guy to ask about this, but I remember hearing a while back the Greeks had two words for enemy. It was like opponent, and that was like sort of a civilized uh, person, and then enemy, which was like more akin to like a barbarian. Does that play into this at all, you think?
Yeah, I think it does. Because remember, now Thucydides points out that there is no word for barbarian in Homer. Um, but Thucydides is going somewhere in his own direction with that. But this thing called Greekness, right? We could say that that is the larger family, was to be distinguished from the barbarians. And as we have it in this particular play, uh, what we would otherwise call Greekness are the Achaeans, uh, not to be confused with the Trojans, who are this foreign people. And the issue though is, are they so foreign that they're of a different kind of species altogether? And that's what the difference between Greekness and barbarian is. And so we're on the precipice of that. So I think you're absolutely correct, in thinking about that, because that's right where we are. But one thing that occurred to me though, and this might be crucial, uh, is that I I've said all this stuff. I mean, I even read the lines of what Ajax says about what happens between friends and enemies, and then I even read the lines of what Odysseus says is noble about the difference between friends and enemies. I I think there's a big distinction to be made here, and this could be it. They say it for different reasons, I think, because remember, Ajax says, only hate as much as needed, because your enemy might tomorrow be your friend, and only do good to friends as much as is needed, right? In other words, no excess, because tomorrow they might be your enemy. That's utilitarianism, right? That's you're just thinking in terms of what you can gain out of it yourself. We don't. I don't think that we see that in Odysseus, right? Odysseus is simply recognizing the fact that Ajax, uh, while he was alive, was noble, was great. Uh, because there's nothing, you can't say there's anything utilitarian about Odysseus's appreciation for that, because Ajax is dead. There's nothing that's going to come from that. Um,
In fact, he gets negative utility because he pisses off Agamemnon with his
exactly.
notion. Like if Odysseus was sort of this, spineless, the best for the most sort of guy, he'd be like, yeah, no, we should definitely leave this enemy out for the buzzards to eat, and we should also divvy up his stuff and maybe kill his wife and kid and his whole line, like just ingratiate himself further with the King of Kings in this situation.
Yeah, and I think this is where, for instance, like the element of philosophy would come into play, right? Because what Agamemnon is understanding this is that enemies are enemies, period, right? Doesn't matter if you're an Ajax or just some, I don't know, whatever the Trojan equivalent of Thersites is or something like that. Um, and what Odysseus is saying is he's saying no, there's differences there. And so the wisdom, right, of a king or so, like Agamemnon, he would be able to justify the burial of Ajax because all the people are going to be looking on and saying, why would you even allow this man burial? And say, well, there was a time when he had great virtue, and it's something that you too should strive for. That I mean, because that there's a teaching there, uh, but he could also say, if you never even strive for that, I mean, of course, I'll still throw your body out to the birds. Right? I mean, if you don't live up to, if you don't live up to the kind of martial standard of an Ajax, then I'm not going to have any mercy on you or something. So I think there is a lot that can be said looking into these things further, right? Because again, that comes back around to this distinction between our time now versus their time then, which certainly Nietzsche has in mind, because all we see around us today is nothing but utilitarianism, right? I mean, that's all it is. And it's just nothing but people. I mean, we certainly see it on Twitter, right? People are only friends because of what they can still get out of other people or something like that. Um, yeah, go ahead, please.
No, I was just thinking of the sort of the misused and retarded term, the right side of history, which you know also kind of it's implicit that there is an end of history when you say that there's a right side of it, right? And the lesson that we're not learning in the modern world is that one's legacy is not set in stone, right? What one is remembered for, if he's remembered at all, is shifting with the tastes of the time, right?
Yeah,
Right now we're trending in one direction. Who's to say that we don't trend in a different direction tomorrow, even, you know? So with Ajax and his death, we're seeing Odysseus play with that idea as well. It's like, yes, this man in death was our enemy. He's on the quote unquote wrong side of history, but we could very well end up in the same place as he. So we must remember what was great about him.
yeah. I'm trying to think of the, the argument that's very similar to the. Oh, it's along similar lines because I agree with you that right side of history stuff is just absolute nonsense. It's stupid. The presupposition there is that we're progressing. And the last time I checked and looked around at the fact that there's very little greatness, like what someone like Odysseus would value, there's very little of that around us.
Mm.
Um, we often hear, and this might speak to what you were mentioning at the very beginning about the kind of the moral tinge of the wars. People will say things like, um, "Don't allow the war uh, to turn you into everything that you're fighting against," right? Uh, when they see people that have so much hatred for an enemy that would just do anything to destroy them, it's like, well, wait a minute, don't let the fact that you're at war with them steal away from your own greatness or something like that. but the problem I have with that is that's almost always just an excuse. I mean, there's truth to that, but the people I hear that are usually always saying that, it's just they use it as an excuse for cowardice.
Right? It's
Uh,
a slave
yeah,
morality kind of thing.
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
But it's funny that you bring that up because that is exactly what happens to the sons of Atreus, right? Uh, this all starts because of the thievery of one's wife, and therefore the dishonor of a family. And here in Ajax, we have they dishonor and steal from Ajax.
Yep. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Exactly. Um, oh man, that's what I love about these conversations with you is I end up wanting to stop everything I'm doing and sort of do an entire project on the Ajax now because it makes so
and
much.
I'm not helping with my constant bouncing around to other things that I've read and half read. So I apologize to you and the
No,
listener because
no,
I'm
no. That's
keep
no.
afloat.
What I found, and this is why I love just sort of the all this contemplative stuff, um, is that when you start to see the connections, right, to I mean that's what people want to see, right? The reason people don't read Greek tragedy is because they're like, our educations are so bad
Mm,
that we don't even know what to make of a Greek tragedy when we open it up. We're like, I don't even know how I'm supposed to appreciate this. I mean, the wording is strange. I mean, the whole form, the format of it, the style. I don't know what to make of it. So, the fact that people like you and I can have these discussions and draw the relevance of today into them, that's the most important because then people see, okay, now I know why it is that these are considered to be great literature, right? I recognize the themes now that are alive here, that they've not gone anywhere, uh, because, like I said, I think, and again, this is something I'll have to work out, but I think that the friend enemy distinctionship, that's not even a word, the friend enemy distinction uh, is far more important and rich in Ajax than it is in Schmidt, right? And no disrespect to people who appreciate Schmidt. I'm just saying I think it's deeper here. I think there's more that can come out of it. That better. Another way to say that is it better fits the human condition that we all experience.
mm.
Um, yeah, there's a difference between people who just constantly shift and bring up other texts versus people who very rightly bring up other texts to enhance the discussion at hand, not to just change the subject or anything like that.
So I think one of the reasons that, especially guys on our side of things, are so enamored with Schmidt is because the the sort of firing line Republicans, the neocons especially, but
Oh, that's right.
there's this whole like reverence, like that, like they are the noble opposition. Reagan talked about the Democrats as our Democrat friends who are just misinformed and they
Right.
have different ideas, but we're all still Americans. And meanwhile, the other side of things is like, oh no, these guys are the worst of the worst. So you could say that one side is playing politics, right? One side is dealing with opponents, the other side is dealing with enemies. So the reason that guys are bringing up Schmidt is like, oh no, they see us as an existential threat. We need to kind of shift our thinking on this and
Yeah, yeah,
throw away the scabbard in a lot of respects.
yeah, yeah. That makes complete sense. I just I just really, like I said, you've gotten me hooked. I blame you. It's your fault, man. I'm over here like an addict now. I'm like a junkie
I'm
with my
totally fine being at fault for this.
with my Greek tragedy stuff.
When you write a great dissertation on the Ajax, feel free to blame me.
No, I'm absolutely going to do a full discussion of this on my own, and I'll have all kinds of reference throughout to my conversations here with you. Um, but listen, man, I hate to. I don't want to call it too early or anything, but my dog
Mm,
won't
right.
stop. Won't stop heckling me over here.
Totally fine, totally understandable. And I think we covered most everything, unless there's let's bullet point the last few points that you might have, and otherwise I'll let you get to the dog and await your fuller discussion on this on your program.
Well, what I'd love to do, if I mean, in this, I'm not, you don't have to give me an answer one way or the other, but I mean, this could be really fun if we just did a series going through, uh, beginning with Agamemnon, through Orestes. I
Yep,
mean,
totally down. Let's do
that
that.
could be a lot of,
That'd be great.
yeah, that could be a lot of fun. I mean, this is like a multi sort of week thing or whatever.
Hmm.
Because so long as I'm able to penetrate the Agamemnon, it'll be smoother sailing from there. But 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 yeah, I think this could be a lot of fun. I think this will get a lot of, no one's doing this, right? I mean,
No,
this
they're
would sort
not.
of be this would be
Mhm.
unprecedented, right? Because then going forward, I mean, we've sort of established the foundation, and so very much can be built from this. Because the exact same reason we're able to even talk about Schmidt here is because we see the friend enemy distinction that's being built. I mean, this is, I mean, we're at the foundation on this, with Greek tragedy, from which the entirety of the Western tradition is going to come unfolding here, at this point. So I think this is going to be a lot of fun.
Oh, most definitely, and I'm totally down to do that whenever your schedule sort of allows. Big fan of you and the things that you do and the way that your mind works. And this is uh, a great pleasure for me to host you. So, sir, where can people find you? How can they support your work and get more Athenian Stranger?
Yeah, I mean, the best place is going to be my Athens Corner website, just uh, athenscorner.com. Um, and I'm about to announce, unleash, I guess, a number of recordings, but I'm still in the process of editing them. Uh, but yeah, I mean, just really just Twitter, Spotify, and then my Athens Corner website and stuff. That's going to be tons of stuff, lots of stuff on technology, nihilism, Nietzsche, and adding a bunch of stuff on Plato here pretty soon. So it's going to be a lot of fun.
Wonderful. And I will make sure to link all those things in the show notes. If you've made it this far, I just want to thank you for supporting Canon Fodder and the Double Dealer. You can support the Double Dealer by buying one of our magazines. Issue 13 is available online now. You can become a paid subscriber to our Substack, and you can just like and share all the content that you get from us. I don't know how to end podcasts, so I will say insert ending here.